Welcome everyone, and thank you all for being with us tonight. My name is Amy Takanami. I use she, her, hers. I identify racially as Asian and ethnically as Japanese American, and I'll be co-facilitating tonight's forum with Raul Fernandez, who will introduce himself shortly. We will begin our program with a land acknowledgement. As we gather today, let us take a moment to acknowledge the history of this land we call Brookline. This is the unceded land of the Massachusetts people, whose traditions, language, and stewardship continue today through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapoag. Today, we are living on land that was taken by force. By 1641, the colonists in Brookline had allocated to themselves almost all land that had been inhabited by Indigenous people. Land was not the only form of theft that occurred. Lives were also stolen. Historical records state that in 1675, during King Philip's War, 7 Indigenous men were sold into slavery in the Caribbean by residents of the area that we now call Brookline. The 7 men represent part of the early slave trade. Slavery in Brookline continued and grew, but soon those enslaved were African or of African descent. By 1746, enslavers claimed ownership of over half of all Brookline land. We acknowledge the theft of land, culture, and lives and the ensuing enslavement of Indigenous and African peoples that occurred here. These early policies set the stage for centuries of systemic racism. As we remember these atrocities, BRJE members in the larger town must commit ourselves to address the ongoing inequities that are the result of our history of colonialism and racism. Although we as individuals were not perpetrators of these atrocities, we benefit from these systems. Thus, we dedicate ourselves to addressing them today. Thank you all for participating in our land acknowledgement and for attending our 5th annual BRJE Racial Justice Candidate Forum. Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity, known as BRJE, was founded in 2016 as a grassroots community-based organization to identify and clarify issues of racial inequity and injustice in Brookline, and to build a multiracial coalition to dismantle structural racism. We're excited to announce that just this year, our organization has officially incorporated into a 501c3 or nonprofit to strengthen and sustain our long-term mission and goal of building toward and achieving racial justice and equity in Brookline. We hope tonight will provide the opportunity for all of us in Brookline to be better informed about our candidates' views on racial justice, a topic which too often gets sidelined. Instead, this forum puts racial justice front and center and asks candidates to make public their commitments to racial justice policy. I want to thank Brookline Interactive Group, or BIG, for broadcasting and live streaming our forum tonight, and a special shout out to our forum organizing team, Steve Walter from BIG, and Abby Erdman, Luciana Shachnik, So-Young Kim from BRJE.
And hello, everyone. My name is Raul Fernandez. I use he, him pronouns, and I identify racially and ethnically as Latino. Candidates, we will be running on a very tight schedule tonight. This is not a debate with opportunities to rebut. You will have 90 seconds to respond to each question, and you will also have 90 seconds for your opening and closing statements. Our timekeeper, So-Young, will be displaying a countdown on her screen and will be muting respondents at the end of their time. We will put the questions into the chat so candidates can refer to them, so we won't restate them. We have randomly determined the order of responses for each question to be fair to all candidates. We will begin our evening with questions for our candidate for school committee race, Suzanne Federspiel, Natalia Linos, Andy Liu, and Mariah Nebrega. I should note that Chris Muddy was also invited and expected to attend, but reached out this afternoon to inform us that he would not be participating. After school committee, we'll move into questions for our candidates for the select board race, Arden Reamer, John Van Scoyoc, and Paul Warren. Finally, we will share a pre-recording of an interview we held earlier this week with candidates for the Brookline Housing Authority Board race, Sue Cohen and Kimberly Richardson. We would also like to provide some information for the sake of transparency. Natalia Linos and Kimberly Richardson are both BRJE board members. None of the candidates or other BRJE board members, including Natalia or Kimberly, were involved in the planning of this forum, except for our forum organizing team, who, as you've heard, are Emi Takanami, Abby Erdman, Luciana Shachnik, So-Young Kim, Steve Walter of BIG, and myself. So candidates, tonight we are asking you to go beyond platitudes. We want to understand how your life and professional experiences will inform your work as a school committee member, select board member, or a member of the BRJE board. And we especially want to hear your specific anti-racist policy commitments. Thank you all again for coming. Let's begin.
We'll begin with opening statements for our candidates for school committee. The order of responses for opening statements will be Suzanne, Natalia, Andy, and Mariah. Please include in your opening statements your pronouns and how you identify racially and ethnically. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Suzanne Federspiel, she, her, and I identify as white. And I'm running for the school committee. I guess everybody knows that. So good evening, and thank you to Bridge for this opportunity to focus on equity in our Brookline schools. I am Suzanne Federspiel. I am running for re-election for school committee. I have two children who have attended the public schools in Brookline, Pierce School and BHS. I'm a lifelong educator and worked for many years in the Boston public schools, most recently as a building administrator and as a mentor for teachers and principals. Currently, I am a literacy tutor in Boston and a special education advocate for a Boston student. On the school committee, I serve on the curriculum as chair, finance, and negotiations subcommittees. During my tenure as chair, I did that for 2 years during the pandemic, I served on the search committee for Dr. Guillory, reinstated and expanded the Office of Equity, and established the DEIJ subcommittee of the school committee. Currently, I am serving on the Strategic Planning Committee for the public schools of Brookline. And tonight, I look forward to sharing the ongoing work of equity that we're doing in our schools with this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Over to you, Natalia.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to Bridge for hosting tonight's event. My name is Natalia Linos. I identify as white and ethnically as Greek. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm a mom of 3 Brookline Pierce kids, Amalia, who's in 4th grade, and my twins, Leo and Alexandra, in kindergarten. In the town, I am a town meeting member in Precinct 6 and also chair of the Advisory Council for Public Health. So many might wonder, why am I running? And I'm running for the 1-year seat. And I'm running because I think schools are a critical institution for shaping Brookline, shaping the future. And I've identified 3 kind of priorities. The one is mental health. I think that as a public health professional, I bring expertise. And as someone who chairs the Advisory Council of Public Health, I can help connect our health department and our school, because people are suffering, our kids, but also staff. I also center equity and inclusion in everything I do, and hope to bring that expertise from the work I do at Harvard on structural racism in health. And finally, I'm a strong climate advocate. I'm on the board of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. I'm a member of Mothers Out Front, and believe that climate action has to happen at every level, including our schools. You can learn more about my priorities at votenatalialinos.com. And I hope during the conversation, you can learn more about me as an individual, and as Raul mentioned, what drives me and the priorities that I will bring as a member of school committee if you vote for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Natalia. Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Amy, and thanks to Bridge for organizing this. My name is Andy Liu. My pronouns are he and him, and I identify as Asian American, specifically Chinese American. I'm the father of a biracial student, also at Pierce School. Now I've been on the school committee since 2020, where I've been liaison to the Special Education Parent Advisory Council and to the Brookline Asian American Family Network. And I'm on the subcommittee for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Some personal background, I immigrated to this country as a toddler with my parents. I grew up in this small town in New England that was probably 99% white, if not more. So almost no Asian people, to the point where I actually remember kids and adults like stopping on the street when they saw me and pointing at me as this remarkable specimen. So yeah, I did get my share of racial harassment and bullying and stereotyping at school. And I might talk more later about how that all affects how I think as a school committee member. But for now, I'll just say thanks for the chance to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Andy. Over to you, Mariah.
Thanks, Amy. My name's Mariah Nobrega, she, her, hers, and I identify as a white American. This would be my first re-election campaign. I was first elected in 2020 to the school committee. The The first time I participated in this was also virtual, but as we were in the very early days of the pandemic. The past 3 years have been incredibly trying for students, for educators. And I think that one of the things that I have been so grateful in my time on the school committee was working with people who have similar values as I, as thinking about how we can bring equity and access to the forefront so that every student has the equal opportunity to not just survive, but to thrive, and how we can build systems in place to make that happen. Some of the things that I've been really proud of and is things around our support for students around accessing scholarships, accessing lunch, accessing a lot of the other services that have perhaps not been as equally accessible. And I think that we have the opportunity in the next 3 years to continue and expand that work dramatically. And so I'm looking forward to serving again on the school committee. We are unopposed, the 3 of us running for 3-year seats. So I am looking forward to having that opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. Thanks to all the candidates. We'll get started now with our questions. The order of responses for our first question will be Mariah, Andy, Natalia, and Suzanne. And here's that question. How do your racial and ethnic identities influence and affect your work for racial justice? What are your blind spots? And how will you be holding yourself accountable? And as a reminder, I'm now going to pop that question into the chat. We'll do that for each question. Mariah, you're first.
Thanks. I just want to say that because I'm on my phone, I can't actually see the chat very well. It disappears. So I'll do my best, but if I miss something, my apologies. Is the time going to start? I just want to make sure.
Start when you're ready.
Okay. So it was, I'm sorry, ethnic and racial identity and how it basically informs my perspective and my priorities, paraphrasing. Okay. My family, I grew up here in Brookline. I will say white family, upper middle class, with all of the blind spots that entails. And in my own experience now, I am married to a Brazilian. We have 3 children who are half Brazilian, half American, or I'll say dual Brazilian, dual American. And as the wife of a immigrant and as the parent of children who have different skin tones, varying skin tones, my eyes have been opened, particularly in the past 10 to 15 years, about the reality, which is not my reality, and that my reality is not the reality. I will say that it's greatly informed my perspective on what it means to live in Brookline and how Brookline can be wonderful, but also can shut people out routinely. And so my priorities are, how do we ensure that nobody is shut out, no matter what their background is or what their skin tone is, because too often I have seen something different happen in my own personal experience with my family, as well as hearing from others. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. Andy, you're up.
Thanks, Raul. Yeah, I'd like to talk a bit about belonging and connectedness. So I grew up feeling very foreign, speaking a different language, having different rules at home, getting picked on all the time at school because I looked different. And it actually never occurred to me then that things could be otherwise, and that it was possible to be anything but an outsider all the time. And later on, I did sort of come to see the importance of finding some spaces where you don't have to think like an anthropologist, and where you sort of understand the code and all the things that go unspoken. So I think that a sense of belonging and connectedness has to start in these spaces and work its way outward. And we want that connectedness in our schools. And that's why I think it's extremely important as a long-term goal that the demographics of our educators should broadly reflect the diversity of the families that we serve. I've drafted the proposed PSB policy that tries to codify what we do to move toward that goal. And I think my interest in this issue actually stems from my own experience as, I guess, an outsider kid with no safe adults at school.
Thank you, Andy. Natalia, it's your turn.
Thanks, Raul. So as I mentioned, I'm ethnically Greek. I'm a dual citizen, Greek and American, and I grew up in Greece. So I never went to school in the US. I came here for college at 17. And I bring that up because I think a large percentage, whether it's 30 or 40 of the kids in our Brookline public schools have parents like me who didn't go to school here. And it's interesting because race and the concept of race and ethnicity varies. So I've had a lot of learning to do. To be honest, when I came at 17, it was quite shocking to see how segregated the US was, how our college campus was segregated. And I think in that sense, being an outsider, not having learned about it or had to socialize in the US allowed me to see how stark racism is in this country, especially anti-Black racism, but also other forms of racism. And I think, I still have blind spots. I have blind spots in terms of, that come not only because of my race and the white privilege of, but also wealth, and I speak many languages, I've traveled a lot. And that gives, that by definition puts you in a category I don't have the lived experience of having to struggle for my children, for their education. I feel comfortable contacting teachers. We speak the same language. So the things that come to mind, again, in 90 seconds is that first language, maybe language access is an issue. And I see my time was up, so I'll continue in the next answer, but thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Natalia. Suzanne, your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Ro. I think, well, I'm white, and so that comes with all the privileges that we have. And but I think my work experience in Boston has really helped move me along in understanding how that impacts my thinking and my decisions and my thoughts and policies that we might have at school committees. So what I'm specifically talking about is when I was a building administrator in Boston for 15 years, at the one school where I was for 12 years, I had a Haitian immigrant population, and half my teachers were Haitian in the school. It was a fairly small school, 330 students. And I learned that I needed to step back and listen to them. They knew their culture, they knew what the students needed, they knew what the families needed. And we let them go forward with the programs that we needed. I happened to be there when they had the earthquake in 2010. So there was a lot that we had to do to help our families and help students who came to us for medical reasons. And so that's just one example of the things that I learned in Boston. And, in terms of blind spots, sure, I'm always learning, I'm always listening. And I really count on my colleagues on the school committee to hold me accountable. As well as the families in Brookline. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for your responses. The order of responses for our second question is going to be Natalia, Mariah, Suzanne, then Andy. Our second question for you all is, in the past few months, the College Board released its curriculum for a brand new African American Studies advanced placement class. The College Board gutted many of the units that Black scholars had recommended, including queer studies and Black feminism, and the course avoids using terms like white supremacy and intersectionality altogether. Do you think Brookline should offer this AP African American Studies course? And what is the role of AP classes in advancing racial equity and/or closing the opportunity gap, if any? Over to you, Natalia.
Thanks, Amy. And I don't know if I can get through all of that in 90 seconds. The reality is that school boards are under attack. From conservative forces who are trying to get rid of, critical race theory, LGBT rights. So I'm surprised that the board succumbed to those pressures. And so you're right to ask the question, by not offering it, are we denying students the opportunity who want to engage in kind of that, coursework? I would say, again, I'm not fully educated on the topic. So my approach to this would be through consensus and consultation, but my gut feeling would be, is there a different course that we can offer at the high school and, that is bringing in those voices? I would not want to offer a course that we know has excluded. Or is there a way for a faculty member, a teacher at a school to say, this is the AP African American Studies, and we will have these additional readings because we have chosen that the curriculum is missing these voices that have been excluded? I don't know what is allowed and what isn't. And I need to be honest, I'm not an educator, so I will be learning with everyone. But I think in general, to the second question about, does AP coursework, does advanced placement advance racial equity? I think by definition, structural racism has created too many children who are Black and brown are not getting placed into those courses. So we need to question whether or not they are helping us meet the educational needs of all. And I don't have an answer yet. I will ask the question though.
Thank you, Natalia. Over to you, Mariah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a very broad topic. And I think the element of it that I want to focus on is the question of what is the role of AP classes and how do we ensure that all students are not being tracked into levels at which because either they're being pigeonholed or they are somehow self-selecting themselves out of because they think that they aren't qualified or won't be successful in higher level classes. That's why I'm really excited about the work that PSB staff are doing right now to look at some of this. For example, there's a pilot happening for some of the freshman courses at the high school this next year, looking at how we can do unleveled English in the same way that unleveled world history has happened for the past, goodness, I think it's around 5 or 8 years. I can't remember how long it's been going. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how we think about these programs so that it's not just everyone's in the same level, but everyone has additional opportunities to succeed, whether we have people who have opportunities to do honors projects or to plus up, because I really think that what bothers me significantly is the idea that students at a very young age are being told that they have some sort of lack of competency or competency. And I don't want any of these sort of legacy systems like AP or others to box in any of our students. And I'm at time, so sorry, wrap up.
Thanks, Mariah. Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So this is a very long conversation to have. I will say that we do have African American studies in the high school, and it's a strong program and strong coursework. So that is good. No, it's probably not AP. I don't know if our kids probably could take AP tests if they wanted, but using our coursework, but I'm not sure about that. I would have to check on that. So I'm kind of going along with Mariah in terms of the AP classes. You know, I actually believe that AP classes should be open to students who are interested in taking that on, and not because they've been told that they can or they cannot do it, but because of what they want to take on and what they want to learn as a student. And so, you know, again, we have to make sure that, you know, as they're coming up through K-8 programs, that they are confident learners, that they understand themselves as learners, that they know what engages them as learners. And, you know, AP is not for everybody, just because it's just not necessary for everybody, or it may not be of interest to people, or it may not work for their learning style. But we want to make sure that students feel comfortable, that they have the confidence that they can take on these courses if that is what they want to do, and that they have the skills that they can use if they're taking on these courses.
Thanks, Suzanne. Andy?
Yeah, thank you. So as the last person to answer this question, I think my thoughts have already been expressed by others. I also think that AP classes ought to be open to anyone with a strong interest in the subject and a willingness to work. I certainly think we should be teaching AP African American history. I don't have the background to know to what extent we can do that without following the College Board curriculum to the letter. I think for me, this opens up the broader issue of like, how do we distribute the curriculum between a component that sort of takes each student well outside of their own lived experience and some other component that tries to speak directly to each student, so where they came from and what shaped them directly. And that is something I very much missed out on as a kid. So something that made me happy over the last couple of years was this effort by the Brookline Asian American Family Network to buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of books on Asian American history, distribute them to school libraries and classrooms. I think that would actually have done a great deal for the kid that I was. And I'm glad we're doing that sort of thing now, and also looking into a course such as this one.
Great. Thank you, Andy. And order of responses for our third question. Andy, you'll be up first, followed by Suzanne, Mariah, and Natalia. And here's that question. According to DESE's 2021-2022 Student Discipline Data Report, Black students are nearly 5 times more likely to be suspended than white students. How do you account for these outcomes, and what policies would you implement to address this issue? Andy?
Yeah, the last time this came up directly for us was a couple of years ago when I was part of the unanimous school committee in recommending that SROs be disinvited from our schools. And it was clear at that time that they were perceived like very differently by students of color, and that across the country, they sort of do represent a kind of disciplinary approach that doesn't coexist well with the student support approach that we're trying to uphold here. And I know that our recommendation to remove them offended quite a few people and struck others as throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I think most of us were voting our conscience based on the disparate impact of having representatives of the criminal justice system stationed in our schools.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you, Raul. I think I want to focus a little bit on there are many reasons why this may happen, that the data may show this, but what I think we've talked about a lot is looking at the mental health surveys of our students and finding that the two most critical issues are, do students feel that they belong at the school, and do students feel they have a safe adult that they can talk to at the school? And there are some discrepancies there in our data, and we just took a hard look at it, and we're going to be talking about it some more. So that I don't really think it's a matter of discipline as much. I mean, the discipline is coming from the adults, but it's not misbehavior on the Black students' part. It could be certainly racism on the adults, but also, you know, is their culture recognized, honored? Do they have a feeling of belonging and engagement? Do they feel they are capable and contributing? Those are all part of the mental health programs that we have, that we need to make sure that don't blame the students. They're doing fine. It's why are they being caught for discipline? And that was what I would take a look at.
Thanks, Suzanne. Mariah, you're up next.
Thanks. For me, I think that this is really about, as Suzanne said, the adults and the beliefs and perceptions that adults bring to their practice. Unintentional, I'm sure, as many of them are. I'm very supportive of the work that the Office of Educational Equity is doing in terms of building a practice around professional development about structural racism. And in fact, at school committee, we had a wonderful meeting with Janae 10 days ago or so, 9 days ago, last week, about our own beliefs and how those inform and misinform, I'll use the term misinform, our own practice. And so to me, it's really about how we bring it back to adults, how we open people's eyes to the bias, the implicit bias that exists in their own perception, and how we build in safeguards to mitigate that. And I think that when it comes down to that, so it's looking at what are the procedures around discipline, who is allowed to issue discipline, what are the safety checks in place around discipline, how do we begin to measure this ourselves so that we can routinely look at this data? Because to me, it's we measure what we care about, and this is something we need to care about and we need to eliminate. Thanks.
Thanks, Mariah. Natalia, please close this out here.
Thanks, Raul. So for me, this data point that that Black students are nearly 5 times more likely to be suspended than white students is a clear message that our schools are not working for Black students. So it's not what have the Black students done but really what Mariah and others were trying to say is like, what is happening? And part of it is implicit bias. We know some studies from kindergarten that teachers, they've recorded them and watching like kindergarten kids, and they spend more time like looking at the Black boys than they do at sort of, girls, and there's gender and racial dimensions, and that's implicit. there's also probably something about our structures of our schools. And, here, this is a plug. I'm a big supporter of Pierce renovation because the open plan may not work for some kids, like rowdy or louder kids. And, so suspension may then become the norm as, how you control kids. I'm not saying that Pierce kids are being suspended, but really reviewing suspension criteria. What is being missed? Are we making sure that kids have access to quiet space when they need that space? Are we meeting their full needs, their socio-emotional needs, their mental health needs, their educational needs? And what about the school environment? The school teachers is leading us to this horrible statistic, because suspension is a failure. It's a failure of the adults and the staff in the room. And so I would really question, I would like to look at data specific to Brookline, obviously, if I was on school committee, to see if they are as stark as the DESE wide ones, and then really try to address the policies from what are our suspension criteria to what are the mitigation that we could put in place, focusing on our environment and our teachers, not on the students. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you all for your responses. The order of responses for our fourth question will be Natalia, Andy, Suzanne, then Mariah. Our fourth question for you all is, according to the town's 2022 disparity report, the cost of childcare is often the main reason women leave the workplace. About 55% of families report spending at least $10,000 a year on childcare, with Black and Latina women hit hardest. Brookline's Early Education Program, or BEEP, is a high-quality early childhood program that's part of the Brookline public school system, serving students aged 2.9 to 5. Tuition, including extended day programming, can be between $17,000 and $22,000 a year. Do you support fully funding BEEP to make universal pre-K a reality in Brookline? If so, how would you make this happen? And if not, why not? Natalia, over to you.
Thanks, Amy. And as a mom of 2 5-year-olds who just started kindergarten, I know that even for women who are in the workforce, who are working a full-time, well-paid job, the cost of childcare is really high. And we know with COVID, women left the workforce in disproportionate numbers, and the impacts are probably starker. So yes, I support universal sort of pre-K in the form that, New York City has 3 and 4-year-olds, and some towns like Cambridge have. Now, obviously, we have a problem. We are going to vote for an override because we don't have a budget to even fund our existing, school and staffing. So this is less of a question of, me as a school committee member embracing it. I do embrace it. I think, universal childcare, we know that investments in the 3 to 5 are important for lifelong learning. They're a good investment for our economy, but it's really persuading our town and our residents who are going to be voting, presumably, if we were to do that for higher taxes, that this is the right investment. As an interim stage, I do wonder if there are some measures that we could take, vouchers, like why is there no childcare in Brookline that accepts vouchers? Is there something that can be done to expand access to BEEP or to other daycare so that the cost isn't an impediment? And obviously, gender equality is central to this, as is racial equality, and we have to think about it dynamically. And I commit to thinking through this with my fellow school committee members.
Thanks, Natalia. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, so my son is a graduate of BEEP, and it really saved our family, I think. Like, it provided a kind of education that sort of turned things around for all of us. It's been an ongoing discussion on school committee, sort of how to make BEEP available to more people, and also how to extend the BEEP school day so that it becomes more of a viable option for those who do need childcare, right, and can't come in and pick up their kids at what for most is a very inconvenient time. And so, we originally thought that we would need override funding to make it happen, but at the moment, we are planning in the next couple of years to make BEEP a full day program without having to resort to override funding, simply by making the expansion of the school day self-supporting through tuition increases and enrollment increases. And it's been sort of an ongoing discussion in finance, really, how to where to set the tuition level, because you can set it a little bit lower in order to make it slightly more affordable for more people, or you can set it higher for those who can really afford it to make it free or almost free for those who otherwise would have no real childcare options at all in Brookline. So that is an ongoing discussion. I think there's very broad consensus on the school committee about supporting BEEP, extending access to BEEP, extending the BEEP school day, but we have to find the sweet spot in terms of the tuition.
Thanks, Andy. Suzanne?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yeah, we absolutely, I could say almost everybody on the school committee is in favor of expanding BEEP, making it more available. There are some scholarships for children, so that is, we do pick up some children that way that would not otherwise be able to afford it. We certainly would like universal free. I had that in Boston. We called it K0 for 3-year-olds, K1 for 4-year-olds, and I had that in my school. It's a wonderful opportunity. We also had play groups at my school, so the parents would come in with the children, but they would be in the school at 2.5, 3. So they get used to coming into a school. It would help us also identify children who may need special services at a very young age. And so for all those reasons, it's really important. We're hoping to have the full day program for BEEP fall of 24 is how we're putting it in the budget. And we've had a long discussion about that. And so I think that will probably happen. And we did speak to our legislators about that. We had a legislative meeting and we talked to both our state and federal reps and said, we need some help with this. This is something that needs to happen. It needs to be universal free. And we need help from the state level and the federal level. There are lots of advocates for that. I belong to a couple of groups that are doing that, and we're pushing hard for it.
Thanks, Suzanne. Mariah?
Thanks. So this is something that I've been incredibly interested in and definitely have pushed onto. And as Andy and Suzanne mentioned, this is something that's already in the planning for fall of 24, right? Fall of 24, basically 18 months from now, to have the full day, which would be 8 to 2:30. As far as universally free preschool goes, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's incredibly difficult to fit in our budget. But what I think is more important at this time is for us to be able to provide free BEEP to students who need it. We've expanded the number of free slots for BEEP. So there's 40 scholarship slots at this point, which is a significant percentage of the total BEEP population. And one of the things that I've been pushing is for having students with financial needs be prioritized, because whereas other students and other families may be able to go to a paid program elsewhere, families who do not have the means to afford a paid program don't have other choices. And so it's really important, if we're serious about early literacy and early childhood education, that we prioritize the families for whom this is their only option. And I continue to believe that we will build towards that, so that we have students who are the most vulnerable having that priority access, along with our other vulnerable students for whom PSB is a primary service provider. So very important to me, and I look forward to how we can continue to work on that.
Thank you, Mariah. We'll now move on to our fifth and final school committee question. The order will be Mariah, Natalia, Andy, and Suzanne. Here's that question. For the past 4 years, Bridge has advocated for reinstating the ACE guidance position from half-time to full-time, which we see as a racial justice issue. The percentage of ACE students who were accepted into four-year colleges in 2018 was 93%, but dropped to 57% in 2021 in the 2 years after the reduction of the guidance counselor position. The drop in the rate of college attendance was even more dramatic. In 2018, 93% attended four-year colleges, while in 2021, only 31% attended. ACE students include some of our district's most historically marginalized student populations, including BIPOC, first-generation, and low-income students. Do you share our belief that it is important to reinstate the position and further invest in the ACE program? If so, how will you prioritize strengthening the ACE program once you're elected or re-elected back to the school committee?
Thanks. So to me, this brings up bigger questions of how we know which programs are providing the supports that our student needs, and so how these decisions are made. I appreciate Bridge's advocacy for the specific 0.5 FTE position. And I think, though, and this is something that we on school committee have asked, is how do we start to understand the different programs that are offered to different vulnerable populations? And how do we ensure that if, for example, one program is having better outcomes than others, that we give that program additional resources and have it serve additional students? So to me, it is not just about ACE or STEPS or any one of the other programs. It's about being able to really understand how we measure student success, and then how we invest in those programs that provide that, that return for our students, so that we really see them maximizing their potential.
Thank you. Natalia, you're up next.
Thanks, Raul. And I should, highlight again that I'm the only of the four of us that is not an incumbent, has not been part of the conversation. So I come to this, with less information. So in general, from what I have heard and what I have learned, and obviously the stats that you shared, Raul, I would be in support of increasing that guidance position from half to full-time. And I say that especially right now with the mental health crisis being one where I do think the folks around, not just the teachers, are unable alone. So it's the guidance counselors, other, folks who are providing social workers or socio-emotional support. We really, really need to think about that, not just for the whole school, but specifically for programs that serve low-income families, our students of color who have been hit hardest by the pandemic, both because of direct loss, meaning lost loved ones. We know the data shows that, children have lost a parent, and those rates, the children who have lost a parent are much more likely to come from low-income Black or brown households. But it's not just the health cost. People have lost jobs. So the emotional and difficult sort of the stress and the ability of a parent to supervise, for example, to help their student, apply for college depends on having that, stability that was really destroyed for so many. So I think we should be bringing back to the table our guidance positions for all, but especially thinking about it. And from what I've heard, the ACE guidance position should be fully go back to full-time. Thanks.
Thank you. Andy, you're up.
Yeah, so there is a strong commitment on the school committee to programs that serve the underserved, right? Things like the Calculus Project. We're working on expanding Steps to Success, maintaining our commitment to METCO. When it comes to a particular 0.5 FTE position, in a properly functioning school system, that is not up to the school committee to either make it full-time or not. That is a decision for the administration, and the school committee can sort of make our values known, but we cannot reach in there and sort of make it happen. And the sad fact is that we're in a period of budgetary contraction right now, and the school budget is under active attack from those who want to cut us even further. And, like I said, we can make our values known, but we cannot reach in there and take over what is the role of the school administration for a single position like this.
Thank you. And Suzanne.
Yeah, hi, Raul. I'm going to sound like the other two school committee members because we have talked about ACE quite a bit, and we do support the program, and we do see the value, and we do not typically go into a school and look at particular line items in their budget. That is really up to the building administrator. So I have had the opportunity to attend several ACE graduations. The program is a wonderful program. I've also heard them speak at the invitation of DESE, so I know that they've gotten a lot of recognition. I think Amy does a fabulous job, and perhaps I don't understand all of why it was cut and then why it wasn't reinstated. Again, that was at the building administration level. But I'm wondering, if there might be some other outside resources, possibly Brookline Public Health, that we could look at to provide some either grants or money or personnel. They do a tremendous amount of work with our students outside of school, but perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it would be worth looking into to see if they could come into the school. We have a lot of programs, Excel, Winthrop House, SWS, we could kind of go on, and then all the supports that we talked about, Steps to Success, MECO, Latino African American Scholars. So we have a lot of programs that are really top notch, but they all need a lot of support and resources.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for your responses. That ends the question and answer period, but we'd like to give our candidates an opportunity to make a final statement. As a reminder, final statements should be 90 seconds or shorter, and the order of final statements will be Suzanne, Mariah, Natalia, then Andy. Over to you, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you. I actually didn't write out a final statement because I wanted to see what we talked about, what we didn't talk about. So maybe I'll just hit on some of the highlights that the school committee has talked about and we're working with. I'm thinking of, for instance, in curriculum, where I'm the chair this second half of this year. We are looking at things like middle grade review and support, the win block that they have, the schedules, choice and voice that students have. And I think that's really important when we talk about all of our groups of students. We've talked about affinity groups for the students that they have in their schools. We just had a presentation on PEP at the Heath School that looks really exciting, where students work on some of the social emotional challenges that may be there. METCO gave us a grant for this year to look at the equity in the materials. It's a review that we'll be looking at Curriculum Subcommittee April 25th. So people are invited to that. And, again, we've talked about doing our own equity work in school committee as school committee members. Janae is doing that work with us, and we will continue that work. So I am committed certainly to equity and every way we can. And it's important that we ask these questions and we ask people to come and speak to us about them. And I am running, and please vote for me May 2nd.
Thanks, Suzanne. Over to you, Mariah.
Thanks. Since we're not in a competitive race, I'm going to use my last 90 seconds to talk about the importance of questions 1 and 2 on the ballot. Question 1 is to support the Pierce renovation. For everyone, this is really for everyone in the audience who's listening. This is really an important project. Pierce, if you haven't gone, I urge you to visit yesforbrookline.com and sign up for a tour. The building itself is in just terrible condition. And we really can't wait any longer. This is just a vital thing. I was a Pierce parent from 2010 to 2022 until just this past June. And my kids have gone through, really just struggled with the building's condition. And it's just not fair. We have to do the right thing so that all of our Brookline students have quality building to be in. And then now I want to turn to question 2, which is about the operating override. So much of what we've talked about tonight, the initiatives that have begun, the important supports that we need to offer students, all of these things are only available in a well-funded school system, not the school system where we are cutting millions of dollars and we're going to have to cut, dozens of educator positions if we don't get this override passed. And so I would strongly urge everyone, if you are in support of the issues of equity, justice, and education, then please vote yes on questions 1 and questions 2. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mariah. Natalia?
Thank you so much, Amy, for hosting this discussion. And since I am in a competitive race, I do want to urge all of you to vote for me. You can learn more at votenatalialinos.com. You can contact me if you want to volunteer, if you want to ask questions. I'm really proud to have been endorsed by all 8 current members of the school committee. And I hope to bring sort of my ears, most importantly, to listen not only to them really critically, but to everyone in the community. We didn't get to talk about recruiting and retaining staff of color, and I'm concerned with, as Mariah said, if the override doesn't pass, like who is going to be impacted most? We need to vote yes on 1 and 2. I also didn't share in my introduction that my children are, half Greek American and half Arab American. I think that diversity is really important. I'm so proud that there are so many languages spoken in our schools, and we need to celebrate that and also ensure that structural racism that has harmed mostly Black Americans, who live and have been raised in the U.S., that we treat that specifically. Anti-Asian sentiment was at a height during COVID, and that is something that I want to take on head on. So, my commitment is that I will listen. I will try to think through every policy, how racial justice integrates with that. I will look at data, but I will also hear people, their fears. You know, during COVID, what I learned is you need to listen to people in their whole self, not only looking at the data. And I am committed to working hard. So I hope that you will vote for me.
Thanks, Natalia. And over to you, Andy.
Well, thank you to Bridge for organizing this forum, which is always the highlight of every election season. I think Suzanne and Mariah and I were last on in 2020. And since then, we've had kind of a tumultuous 3 years on the school committee. We've had a pandemic, we had labor disputes, we've had racist incidents, we've had some really depressing data coming in about racial disparities in the Brookline schools. And I mean, let me just say again that in my view, the most important thing a school committee can do to address these disparities is to help build an educated workforce that actually reflects the diversity of our students. And that requires a commitment across multiple successive school committees. It requires commitment and follow through by the administration. And it requires a financial stability, which at the moment is very much in question, right? So we're not going to attract and retain excellent educators of color if every year they get threatened with mass layoffs because our budget is under threat. So, you know, with this election coming up, please help spread the word that a less than fully funded school system is just going to be a less equitable school system as well. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Andy, and thanks to all of our school committee candidates. They are Suzanne Federspiel, Natalia Linos, Andy Liu, and Mariah Nobrega. Thank you for your responses. Next up, we're going to switch gears and hear from our candidates for the select board race, Arden Reamer, John Van Scoyoc, and Paul Warren. As a reminder, you will have 90 seconds to respond to each of the questions asked, and you will also have 90 seconds each for your opening and closing statements. Again, a reminder, our timekeeper, So Young, will be displaying a countdown on her screen, and Luciana Shashnik will be muting respondents at the end of their time if you go too long. Thank you all for joining us, and let's get started.
We'll begin with opening statements for our candidates for select board. The order of responses for opening statements will be Arden, John, then Paul. Please include in your opening statements your pronouns and how you identify racially and ethnically. Over to you, Arden.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, good evening. I am Arden Reamer, pronoun she, her. I identify as white and American. I am a parent of a 10th grader at Brookline High School and an 8th grader at the Ruffin Ridley School. And I am a town meeting member in Precinct 8. Thank you, Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity, for inviting me to this important conversation on racial justice. It is the most important conversation we need to have, especially as candidates for the select board. Let's start with equity and why it doesn't exist here in Brookline. Structural racism is woven into the fabric of our society, embedded into every aspect, and it has benefited us privileged white folks here in Brookline from the beginning until this very day. And the time has come for us to share these benefits with everyone in Brookline. Racism is not addressed with individual bias training because it's structural. It's not me, it's not you, it's us. It's a collective legacy that impacts us to this day. So here's what I will do if I am elected to the select board. I will initiate a dialogue with you. I will listen to you. I will learn from you. I will share the benefits I have been so privileged to take for granted as a white person living in Brookline. I will fight for equity by tackling the opportunity gap and ensuring that women and minority-owned businesses benefit from our policies. I will fight for justice by ensuring greater participation and equal opportunities in our community and our policies. And I will do this together with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arden. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Emmy, and thank you, Raul. I can honestly say it feels good to be here again, even though I think, you know, let's not hide the fact that I might not be your favorite candidate here tonight. I don't know that for sure, but I'm just going to guess. And that the reason for that would be that I don't always sort of march in lockstep with, you know, a lot of the folks in Brookline who, you know, have one view of how to address race and equity problems. But believe you me, I really do want to see Brookline improve when it comes to race and equity. And I don't know if I introduced myself properly, but it's John Van Scoyoc Select Board, he, him. One of the problems that I personally have experienced from the day I was elected and started to serve is that we talk past one another. And yet when we have opportunities to sit down over a bite to eat, all of a sudden we communicate much more effectively with each other. I think a first step towards improving race and equity climate in Brookline is going to be to create more of those opportunities where we talk frankly to each other, but also with trust in each other, and avoid as much as possible the opportunities such as we had last night at the select board meeting where we talk past one another. And I'll explain more about that as we proceed.
Thank you, John. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, I'm unmuted now. Hi, I'm Paul Warren, he, him. I identify as white and Irish Italian American. I have been a 12-year resident of Brookline. I'm going to cover the basics. I am a father of 5, the grandfather of 2 and about a half, because I have one coming. I'm a stay-at-home dad of 2 young children that are at the Lawrence School, one in Beep and one in Lawrence. They'll both be there next year. I feel that I have a unique set of experiences and qualifications for the select board. I'm a seasoned business executive. I've been in business for over 30 years, managing large organizations and budgets. I have an interesting start. I was married at 17. I had my first child at 18. If it wasn't for Section 8 housing, WIC, food stamps, and Medicaid, I wouldn't be sitting before you. And I look forward to talking more about that. I've been a successful public servant. I've served on the advisory committee. I understand how our government works. I've been serving in the town meeting for over 4 years. I brought forward a number of warrant articles that have had a high impact on the town in a positive way. And I'm also a dedicated public school parent. I take my children to school each and every day. I enjoy it. I have a strong commitment for the public schools. And I believe that we actually have to have an equitable education for everybody. So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. The order of responses for our first question will be Paul, Arden, and then John. Here's that question. How do your racial and ethnic identities influence and affect your work for racial justice? What are your blind spots, and how will you be holding yourself accountable? Paul, you're up first.
Thanks, Raul. So, I think that my early experience in life probably has the most relevance to racial equity in Brookline. And frankly, that's the experience of having to live in income restricted housing and social services. And the reason why that's important and I think relevant is that, many of our Black and Brown BIPOC in Brookline actually live in public housing. They are under-resourced. And, having that experience early in my life for 4 or 5 years, I understand what it means to have to go have your income verified on a regular basis, the fear of losing your health benefits, the fear of losing your housing, and to be food insecure. I've experienced that. So it's important that I do have that relationship to current state. My blind spot, frankly, is I believe that my blind spot is youth. I have good relationships, individuals my age, multiracial relationships, but younger Black and Brown in the high school, I don't have those relationships and I need to reach out to them. That's a blind spot for me. And I really need to better understand their experience within Brookline. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arden, you're up next.
Thank you so much. Protecting women's reproductive rights and being there to fight for women and children is the passion of my lifetime. And it is absolutely an access and equity issue. Abortion care and women's reproductive rights disproportionately impacts women of color. And here in Brookline, we have the Women's Health Services. It is a women's reproductive rights, women's reproductive care and abortion clinic. And I have been supporting it for years. I am an advocate. It is also a women-owned business. It's owned by Dr. Lolly Deli-Bovey, who is Brookline's Brookline Commission for Women, Woman of the Year 2 years ago. I have been fighting for women's reproductive rights from the get-go, and I support that because it impacts all of us as a community, and it impacts us here in Brookline. And if we think that it doesn't impact us here in Brookline or in Massachusetts, we're wrong, because all we have to do is look at what happened earlier this week when a judge from Texas overturned an FDA-approved drug, mifepristone, which has been an abortion drug that has been legal and on the market for decades. And if it hadn't been blocked, it would have impacted hundreds of thousands of women immediately. So it's absolutely an issue here in Brookline, and one that I will talk about again when I speak of Warrant Article 20, which is Safe Haven Brookline, which I am working on now for Springtown meeting. Thank you.
Okay. John, your turn.
Thanks very much, Raoul. And I realized after I spoke that I did not identify myself, as I will now, as white, of Dutch heritage. And I think the fact that I skipped over that part unintentionally maybe tells you something about me. I'm not comfortable, truthfully, with that sort of an introduction to getting to know people. But on the other hand, I totally recognize that I need to get comfortable with it. I need to get comfortable with the fact that I was raised in a suburban setting that was largely white and largely privileged people. Westport, Connecticut, came to another semi-suburban setting, that's Brookline, largely white, largely privileged, largely well-to-do, but significantly not well-to-do and not white and not privileged. And I've spent a lifetime trying to get past the blind spots that we all bring with us because of our background and because of our upbringing, because of our learning experiences in life. I want to continue that. And I want to continue it on a basis of, first, let's talk about how do I begin to trust you and how do you begin to trust me? And I've been having some of those conversations. They're difficult. In a second term as a select board member, I'm going to have a lot more of them.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for your responses. The order of responses for our second question will be John, Paul, then Arden. Massachusetts is in the midst of a housing crisis, and towns like Brookline, with our increasingly unaffordable rents, unobtainable home prices, and a legacy of racial exclusion, have been criticized for not doing enough to provide affordable housing. Based on the most recent Brookline Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Disparity Report, 47% of renters in Brookline spend more than 30% of their income on housing, while 23% spend more than 50% of their income on housing. Waiting lists for subsidized units are often 2 to 10 years long, and the median sale price of a home in Brookline has increased from $1.4 million in 2014 for a single family to $2.2 million in 2020. Policies like upzoning, particularly in major transit corridors, higher inclusionary zoning requirements, and rent stabilization have been discussed as ways to increase access to affordable housing in Brookline. Which of these policies, if any, do you support and why? Over to you, John.
Thanks. Excuse me. I want to just read briefly from a letter that was sent to me as a member of the select board earlier this week. And it concerns a white-collar professional employee of Brookline Town Hall who is currently living out of their car due to displacement from an inability to afford rent in the community. I read that letter and I had to say to myself, I thought I recognized the full depth of this problem of the gap between incomes and the cost of housing in Brookline, but I never dreamed I'd be reading about an employee of Town Hall having to live out of their car. But I did this week. And I think we have to face the fact that that problem has many dimensions. Maybe it's a problem of we don't pay enough to our employees in Brookline. And we got to cope with that. Maybe it's a problem of, although there are affordable units in Brookline, there clearly are not enough of them. And maybe it's also a problem of how we respond when we get an email such as this. And I frankly don't have the answer because we keep running up against the fact in Brookline that we're very limited on resources to add, but we've got to add to the extent that we can to address this problem, because it's clearly worse than even I had imagined.
Thank you, John. Over to you, Paul.
Hi, thank you, Amy. This is a passion of mine. So if we want to have more affordable housing in Brookline, we need to intentionally build more affordable housing in Brookline. We can do that two ways. We have a great opportunity with the MBTA Communities Act, the study along the Harvard Street corridor, or a modified corridor that may be proposed. And, we need to dramatically increase the amount of income restricted housing through through inclusionary zoning. This is a once in a generation opportunity to build a significant amount of income restricted housing. That means that we need to change our policies. Today, developers have a choice. If they build something between 4 units and 19 units, they don't have to build the units. They can write a check to the Housing Trust Fund and not build the units. In my mind, that's called redlining. We are redlining buildings, making them exclusive and luxury, and we're writing a check to the future of where housing might be built in 10 or 15 years. So I think we need to dramatically change our inclusionary zoning bylaws and build income restricted housing. I think the minimum should be 20%. The other thing we should do is we should lobby and continue to lobby the state to invest more in our Brookline public housing and our housing authorities. And I know that that's an ongoing effort, but we need to make sure we do that. So those are the two things that I would do and work on the select board. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And over to you, Arden.
Thank you. Zoning has traditionally been a way of perpetuating racism in our country, in our state, and absolutely in our town. And we need to take a look at what we can do differently. So here are a couple of things. We can take a look at our affordable overlay districts, which we have started to do in town meeting, and we should continue to do and take a look at that very seriously. We should think about new sources of funding for our affordable housing trust. That is absolutely something that we need to build up and continue to pay into. And we need to support form-based zoning, whether that's through the MBTA Communities Act and complying with that in a way that makes sense for Brookline. In other words, a way that increases our thriving businesses, that builds housing units close to transportation accessible areas, that makes sure that it creates housing for low-income families, but also middle-income families and everything in between. And we need to absolutely look at the way we zone in our town of Brookline. And that is something I am committed to doing if I am elected to select board or if I remain as a town meeting member. Either way, it's something that we need to do entirely to help solve our affordability crisis and our problem of racist zoning. Thank you.
Thanks, Arden. All right, the order of responses for our third question will be Arden, John, and then Paul. The question is, how do you define environmental racism, and how does environmental racism show up in Brookline? What specific policies would you implement as a select board member to address environmental racism in town and move us closer toward environmental justice? Arden?
Yep. Environmental justice is a big issue here in Brookline. You wouldn't think it. I mean, a lot of people might be in denial and think that it doesn't exist here, but that's not true. And what you have to do is you have to look at lower socioeconomic groups where they are consolidated, and seniors as well, and look at where they are consolidated. And those are our issues. Those are our hot points for environmental injustice. And we actually have two of them here in Brookline. I just attended a wonderful Mothers Out Front brunch where there was a presentation on environmental justice and what needs to happen here in Brookline. But in order for that to happen, in order for us to start to address what's going on with our climate crisis and how it disproportionately impacts our lower income populations and our senior populations, we have to start solving the affordability crisis. And that's exactly what I talked about before, because that is a key issue in how we start solving this problem of environmental justice. And it does impact us here in Brookline, and it is a critical part of what we need to look at. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Arden. John?
To me, I take a very different approach to this because I have, more than anything else in my time on the select board, committed myself to, to the cause of addressing climate change. And I feel that it is such an urgent cause that, and you may have seen the report just today, that temperatures, ocean temperatures warming is proceeding faster than people had thought and could end up completely disrupting all of the currents in the ocean that we rely on to protect our food source from the seas and so on, and also for our coastal well-being. It's a problem that needs to be addressed through measures that will actually make a difference in the amount of carbon that we put into the atmosphere, burning of hydrocarbons. And that has to happen. And then when it does happen, it will impact the future survival of the planet. And if it doesn't happen, whether there's injustice and whether the impacts are unevenly distributed, at the end of the day isn't going to matter because it's going to be the end of the day for the planet. So I want to see us focus first and foremost on effective measures and getting things done. Things like every single vehicle we purchase has to be electric, and more things too, which I'll address as we go on. Thanks.
Okay. Paul Warren.
Thanks, Raul. I'm going to take a much different angle on this question. You know, I'm going to talk about the environment of your home, the where you sleep and where you eat and where you play with your children and where you study and where you relax for our low-income residents of Brookline. For most of them, if almost all of them, that's housing. That's Brookline housing. You know, the worst air in housing is in Brookline housing. It's because they have leaky gas stoves. They have old equipment. They have windows that don't function properly in some places. Perhaps the air conditioning isn't functioning. So we can talk about the macro climate, but I want to talk about the microclimate of in your home. You know, everybody should have the right to live in a home that has fresh air, has conditioned air when it's needed. It's not polluted by gas stoves that aren't functioning properly, or gas stoves at all, because we do know that does affect interior health quality, air quality. So it's just a different take than what we've heard, but I think it's an important one. If you live in that type of environment and it's not being maintained, and you have crappy housing, you know that whatever's going on outside in the planet is important, but not as important what's going on in your own home. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for your responses. The order of responses for our fourth question will be Paul, Arden, then John. Our fourth question for you all is, over 2 years ago, Brookline's Task Force to Reimagine Policing shared their findings. Some of their recommendations have not been realized, including developing a new social services department and a community-based alternative mental health crisis response model without law enforcement. Yes or no, do you support these 2 recommendations? Also, what are your priorities around public safety in Brookline? And what, if anything, would you change about the police's role in promoting public safety, particularly for our BIPOC communities? Over to you, Paul.
So thanks, Emmy. I'm going to maybe not answer the yes, no, the way you want it. I, as a young child, the reason why my mother was single with 6 kids under the age of 8 years old was because of domestic violence. I've had the experience of standing behind the door, waiting for the police to come because there was a mental health issue. So I appreciate some of the proposals about adjusting how we respond to mental health issues or other issues that we may perceive as not a critical policing issue. But I can tell you that the response of public safety when I was a child, that's who I wanted to show up. I wasn't looking for a social work at that time. I think today, our police department does show up with social workers hand in hand. They work together. But I can tell you that there would have been much different outcomes if public safety didn't show up. So that's just lived experience. That's not going to change. It's going to be very difficult to convince me otherwise. And I think the other part of your question was about adjustments in policing. I think that community policing, which I'm not going to have enough time to speak about in this answer, is important. We now have a problem with police don't have relationships with the community. They don't live here, and they're stuck in their cars all the time. So we need to find a way to start building relationships again with the community, with our public safety officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And over to you, Arden.
Thanks so much. Well, it was a start by taking the school resource officers out of the school building. It has been studied, and it is a fact that they do not protect children or youth. So that was a start for our community. I feel that it isn't necessarily policing that keeps us safe. It's social services, mental health, food security, access and resources. So when you talk about how we help our community in terms of keeping it safe, you're talking about social services. You're talking about making sure that it's really about providing resources for our community. And that is something we get through a whole host of holistic organizations and different municipal government resources here in Brookline, and not necessarily the Brookline Police. And I just want to emphasize that. So I want to thank you for the question, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Arden. And over to you, John.
I'm going to give what I guess has to be described as the politically incorrect answer to that question, which is that I supported keeping the police BHA presence. I also supported keeping the school officers, and I think that actually experience since both of those were removed warrants reexamination. And in fact, there is kind of a reexamination, or at least a conversation going on right now, which I support in the case of kind of working out the arrangement between the police department and the school department. I think the fundamental problem that led to the removal of both of those police participation, those police community presences, is that there was a deterioration in trust for the police. It happened in an understandable way as a result of tragic events. But I think we've reached a turning point in that. I think we're rebuilding trust. I think we're doing it through appointments of people such as Jen Pastor, our new chief of police. And I would point out that more as recently as last night, she appeared before the select board, and her priority, as she expressed it to the select board last night, was number one, more mental health response training for the police. So that's her priority, and I think it's in the right place.
Okay. The order of responses for our fifth question will be John, Paul, and Arden. Select board members are empowered to work with the town administrator to set budget priorities. Do you plan to introduce and push for policies that promote racial justice in Brookline through the budget process? And if so, what will your top policy priorities be? John?
Good question. I think we really need to approach it in everything we do, and I hope that doesn't sound like a dodge. But the biggest problem we're having right now in Brookline is that fundamental services, and I'm talking about public safety, but more important than that, if I may say so, education, and then most important to all of us, figuring out a response to the climate crisis that affects everyone, white, black, brown, you name it, that we can actually make progress on. All of those things are under threat right now because we keep falling short in terms of our budgets. So it's not as though we can sort of set aside a special budget for addressing racial justice and equity problems. we have to address our problems, our continuing problems in providing for our kids in the schools and in providing for all of the other essential services of the town, and doing it in a way that racial justice and an appreciation of the requirement of equity is embedded in what we do. I'm not satisfied, frankly, that we have not made enough progress in terms of all of the people who participate through the town in employment. And I think we've got to diversify the employment ranks and diversify our approaches to all of these problems. But first, we got to have the money.
Paul?
Thank you, Raul. I've already spoken about housing policy, and that I think is really important to increase income restricted housing. I think housing is a right, and we don't provide enough of it for low income, and many of our low income residents are BIPOC. But you know, there's another component to this, which is education. Education is what lifted me out of poverty. Education, childcare, so that I could go to it, so I could be educated, so I could go to college. And we just heard during the school forum, the school committee candidate forum, you know, there is a significant gap right now with children of color in the school system, the achievement gap. And it's gotten worse. I think that we hear that, you know, there's much fewer students of color going to college now, four-year college. We have to fix that. You know, to have a child of any color, but specifically BIPOC, because we know it's an issue, to not have the opportunity that my white child gets to have it's such a miss. And I think I don't think it's an easy fix, but I do think we need to look at investing more there, because once BIPOC leaves the school system, you know, we've lost the opportunity to help them. And I think we need to really spend more time looking at it. Thank you.
Arden?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question, because I have a list of equity and racial justice priorities that I would like to accomplish on the select board. And guess what? None of them are budget busters. Instead, they will work to stimulate our economy here in Brookline. So I'd like to look at other communities and what they are doing and how they are doing it successfully, like Boston and Cambridge, or even Newton and other communities like ours. I want to make sure that we have women and minority business development programs, or a program to make sure that we are recruiting businesses and bidding opportunities for women and minorities. I want to do job training for young adults. I think that's very, very important that we have the resources for them and for training them appropriately. And that's also a matter of educational equity. And I want to make sure that we have more diversity on our commissions and our boards. And that is very important. And we need to have a diversity review process. And I don't necessarily mean the numbers of minority individuals we have on our boards and our commissions, but I mean evaluating them with metrics to see how well they are doing in terms of our community and in Brookline. And these are the things that I will prioritize if I am elected to the select board. Thank you.
Thank you, Arden, and thank you all. That ends the question and answer period for our candidates for the select board, but we'd like to give our candidates an opportunity to make a final statement. As a reminder, final statements should be 90 seconds or shorter, and the order of final statements will be Arden, John, then Paul. Over to you, Arden.
Thank you so much, Ms. Takanami, Dr. Fernandez, and Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity once again, as well as my two other colleagues and candidates for the select board, John and Paul. I hope that through our conversation tonight, I have reassured you, even convinced you that I am committed to listening, learning, and fighting the uncomfortable fight to move Brookline in a direction of equity and inclusion and address structural and systemic racism together with you. So where will I start? By tackling the opportunity gap and ensuring that women and minority-owned businesses benefit from our policies here in Brookline, by ensuring greater participation and equal opportunities in our community, and by implementing policies that make Brookline a place of opportunity for all, where everybody thrives regardless of race, income, gender, or age. This is only the beginning of our relationship. If you elect me to the select board, I will be here as a leader on the executive board, but as importantly, with you on this journey to bring equity and justice to Brookline. Please vote for me, Arden Reamer, on May 2nd or before. Thank you.
Thank you, Arden. And over to you, John.
Thank you, Emmy. Thank you, Raul. Thank you, Bridge. I'm going to just say that I have been through this now for, my first term, 3 years. And I'm hearing a lot of things said tonight that I heard said when I ran for the office of select board the first time. And all of that is fine, but it isn't resulting in change that we need. And I'll give you a perfect example. You heard earlier tonight from the members of the school committee, and one of them acknowledged, and good for him that he acknowledged it, that the racial gap in achievement in the Brookline school system has not improved. It hasn't improved. We've been talking about we have to do more, blah, blah, blah. No, we do need to do something, but we're not doing the right things. We're clearly not doing the right things. And my biggest concern right now is that we're not doing the right things because we're not having honest conversations. We're just repeating the same remedies that were repeated, 3 years ago when I ran the first time. And we're not insisting on measuring impacts. We've got to start measuring impacts of the things that we're doing now. And if they're not working, we have to start changing what we're doing. And it has to happen in our education systems. And it has to happen everywhere in our efforts. I'll give you one quick example and then I'm done. Medco, it works. And I was there at the State House supporting the budget increase for Medco. That's an example of what works. We need more Medcos and less programs and promises that don't work.
Thanks, John. And over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Emmy, and thank you for hosting this candidate forum this evening. I really didn't prepare anything as a closing statement, but I kind of wanted to hear how the conversation went. I do feel that I bring some unique skills that are needed on the select board. I have a forward-looking planning experience, perspective, and I certainly get things done. And I know how to work with people and find common ground. But for this particular forum, I do think that while I'm a middle-aged white guy, I can't change that. My early economic experience is, I think, something that I can relate to for folks that are severely under-resourced. I listened to the Black and Brown Club last night, their comments. I was moved. Some of the rhetoric was strong, but they were angry. And they're angry because they're disappointed and they're continuing to be disappointed. We need to address that. So I can say I understand. I don't have all the answers. I reach out to folks. I have a number of folks that I reach out to that advise me on my blind spots. I said earlier that I need to reach out to younger folks because I don't understand their experience, and I need to. So I ask for your vote. It would be my pleasure and honor to serve you on the select board. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Paul, and thanks to all of our candidates for select board, Arden Reamer, John Van Squack, and Paul Warren. Next, we will share a pre-recording of an interview we held earlier this week with candidates for the Brookline Housing Authority board race, Sue Cohen and Kimberly Richardson.
We're going to begin with an opening statement from our candidates for the BRJE board race. The order of responses for the opening statements will be Sue, then Kimberly. Please include in your opening statements your pronouns and how you identify racially and ethnically. Sue, over to you.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum. My name is Susan Cohen. I am using she, her pronouns. I identify as white and Jewish. I am running for re-election to be Commissioner of the Brookline Housing Authority because I think I have unique qualifications to serve in that capacity as I have for the last 5 years. I am the attorney for the Cambridge Housing Authority and have been the attorney for many housing authorities over the decades-long course of my career. I think I have the technical abilities and the mission-driven commitment to serve our public housing residents because I have familiarity with public housing operations, capital improvements, development, and all the subsidy programs. And I could use my decades of experience to support the BRJE, which is a mid-sized housing authority and doesn't have in-house staff that can support these efforts. Now on equity issues, which I want to highlight, one of the things I've participated in recently was an appeal to HUD to increase the Boston area fair market rents for voucher holders. And what that does is it makes it possible for voucher holders to find housing in Brookline and other areas of high opportunity. And then following that appeal at the Brookline Housing Authority, we implemented the small area FMRs that further increased the value of those vouchers. This is a very important commitment to be able to house our voucher holders where they want to live and how they want to live.
Thank you, Sue. Over to you, Kimberly.
Good morning. My name is Kimberly Richardson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as Black. I am a mother of 8 children. That's my most important role that I in my life. I'm running for Housing Authority on 3 issues, right? Representation, lived experience, and change. I think and so I bring a wealth of knowledge, I think, and experience in different avenues of my life that I think I would bring to the Housing Authority. But what I'm asking for most is the opportunity to have a voice at the table, a voice where often voices are silent. And so I think that my experience I've been working for over 26 years in administration, including budgeting and finance and payroll and human resources, which that's a lot. And I also have my master's in social work. And I believe that my experience as a social worker brings like that knowledge of how policy actually affects real people. And so I'm hoping that I'll be elected for Housing Authority because housing policies, decisions, budgets, they all affect real life people, residents like me. And so I'm asking for your vote. Thanks.
All right, thanks to you both. The order of responses for our first question will be Kimberly and then Sue. And our first question for you is, how do your racial and ethnic identities influence and affect your work for racial justice? What are your blind spots? And how will you be holding yourself accountable? And as a reminder, we will put these questions in the chat. And Kimberly, you're up first.
So I think as a Black woman, right, we are most often the most underserved people. And I think about that all the time in the work that I do. And I think that my racial identity as a Black woman, I would be trying to fight for the most underserved in Brookline housing. We're often, I'm sorry, my brain is just like fried. I'm gonna need a minute. I know that our time is going, but I don't feel that well. I should have actually canceled. My work as a Black woman, right? We are often the people who are not seen, and residents in BHA are often not seen. And there's policy decisions, budget decisions that are often made for people and for the people who aren't seen. And so I'm asking for an opportunity to be at the table. I keep saying that opportunity to have a voice at the table where people aren't heard and seen. And I think that there needs to be another thing. There needs to be more diversity at the table. When I talk about diversity, I'm talking about a Black woman. I'm talking about a single mother. And so I think that will bring a voice that needs to be heard. I missed out on my blind spot, sorry.
Okay, Sue, you're up next. Please remember to unmute.
I think this is a great question. As a white woman, I am very aware of the privilege that I have in that my life has been informed by a lot of that privilege, including my educational background and my professional background. But that said, I think that I have made a commitment over the whole course of my career to hearing and responding to the needs of people who are in positions of less privilege, who have been systematically excluded from the opportunities that they're entitled to participate in. And one example of how I've responded to that is how we addressed the Walk and Talk program, which was a policing initiative between the Brookline Police Department and the Brookline Housing Authority. And I think many people saw it as a nice community effort that would help our residents. And yet when we held public hearings on it, we heard from our residents that people of color and their children did not feel that it was furthering their safety and initiatives, and instead made them feel surveilled. And as a result, we terminated that program. So I think that's an example of ways in which I can hear what people are saying, and I am committed to hearing what people are saying. I would like to further Kimberly's voice and hear what Kimberly and other people of color say as we move forward.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you both. The order of responses for our second question will be Sue, then Kimberly. Sue, you just touched on this a little bit, but feel free to expand. Our second question for you is, in 2021, based on the recommendations of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing, the BRJE board voted to remove the police department's Walk and Talk program. Do you agree with this decision? And if so, why or why not? What are your priorities for promoting public safety in Brookline's public housing community? And what, if anything, would you change about the police's role in promoting public safety, particularly for our BIPOC BRJE communities? Over to you, Sue.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad I have this opportunity to speak a little bit more about Walk and Talk, because I think it was a really excellent example of where something that on its face seemed well-meaning was not working the way it was supposed to. And when we investigated Walk and Talk, what we found is it was very loosely framed so that the obligations of the police department or the housing authority in relation to each other were not identified clearly. We couldn't measure whether or not it was being successful or not because we didn't have clear goals. So I think it was appropriate for us to end it, and I voted to end it. That said, I do think that we could develop with resident participation a set of standards, of objectives, of goals that would in fact further the sense of safety or actual safety. We don't want to be just feeling safe, we want to be safe, by working in a dialogue with our residents and then also with the police department. And I would like to use this opportunity to encourage the police department to also engage with the BRJE, because we as a board intend to and will engage in any process that is positively meant to serve our residents and to promote safety in public housing.
Thank you, Sue. Over to you, Kimberly.
So I'm proud to say that I was on that task force, and I strongly believe that people in public housing should not be policed. And if we were to have a walk and talk program, they should be walking and talking throughout Brookline. And so I wholeheartedly agree with the decisions board, and thank you, Sue, for voting for that. I appreciate that. And my priorities for public safety in Brookline public housing is like, we deserve to be safe here, but we don't need to be policed, right? And so I think that there's different ways to promote public safety, right? The police, their job is to keep us safe, but not, so we don't need the police to go on mental health calls. If we have a call for mental health, we don't need that in housing. We need resources, right? And I think that I know that the Walk and Talk program often said that they were providing resources for us, and that wasn't their job, and they're supposed to provide safety. So if I call the police, I expect them to come if I call the police because I'm in immediate danger, right? So I think that we should listen to the residents, right? We should ask them what makes them feel safe. We should find resources and programs around mental health and social services that help them feel safe. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So on to our next question. The order of responses for this question will be Kimberly and then Sue. And here's the question. How do you explain the discrepancies we see between state and federally funded public housing units in Brookline, where most of the family units are state funded, while most of the senior units and units for folks with disabilities are federally funded, leading to an average wait list for families of 6 years or more? How have you, or how do you plan to advocate for more funding for family units, both at the state and federal levels? And again, Kimberly, you're up first.
I wish I had the answer for that, right? I live in state-funded housing, and I've been asking, and I keep hearing people say, there's no funding for state housing. And you know, the federal funded housing they get all the money. Well, not necessarily, because they are underfunded as well. I don't necessarily know the answer for that, but I'm willing to look for the answer for that. I'm willing to look for money. I'm willing to look for resources. I'm willing to work with the commission on figuring out how we make this different, right? Going to the legislator, talking about how unfair it is for people in public housing not to have enough funding, federally or state. And I think that maybe we need to change the way that they've been doing things normally. Why can't family housing be state federally funded? You know, we have the youngest, you know, we have families, right, living in state-funded housing. These kids are growing up in this environment where there's safety issues, right? Safety issues when I think about mold and all different types of things. And people may not think that mold is a safety issue. It absolutely is. Rodents and mice, all of those things are safety issues. And so now we have kids growing up, and this is like, we don't know the effects that mold have on their bodies or on their brains. And that might seem like I'm going off on a tangent, and I don't have the information to like verify that. What I'm saying is I feel like state children and families should be just as important as our seniors, and federal housing in general. It needs to be more important.
Sue?
Okay. This is an issue that I've been fighting for going back for absolutely decades. In the early 2000s, there was a report that was put out that showed that state-assisted public housing was vastly underfunded by our legislature. And while Massachusetts is one of the few states that has state-assisted public housing, once you have that asset, you need to preserve it. And the legislature has been unwilling to do so. You know, I have a little prop, which is, I have this pin that goes back to 2001. And I've been advocating for increase in state-assisted public housing for all those years. That said, I think the GBIO Housing Justice Campaign that I've been participating in is great. And I think that work that your organization and other organizations have done that have highlighted the need will bring it into the public eye in a way that will put pressure on appropriators. And Kimberly hit on something that we need to look into more, which is, are there ways, and the answer is yes, to bring federal assistance into public housing? There's something called Fair Cloth to Rad. We could use that. We can put together the resources of low-income housing tax credits to rehabilitate state-assisted public housing. We could work with the town. We could collaborate with the DHCD, and we could put more resources in. So I know how to do that.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you both. The order of responses for our fourth question is going to be Sue, then Kimberly. Our fourth question that Kimberly already touched on a bit in response to the earlier question is, at public hearings and in individual conversations, we hear that public housing residents face unsafe and unhealthy living conditions, including rodent and roach infestations, mold, deteriorating conditions, delayed maintenance, outdated amenities, including bad internet, no washer dryers allowed in the units, and more. How will you prioritize these health and safety issues if re-elected or elected? Over to you, Sue.
Okay. I've heard those complaints, and I think it's perfectly legitimate for everybody to have decent, safe, and sanitary home. They shouldn't have to live with conditions that are substandard. That said, the BHA board has done a lot in the last number of years to address immediate problems that affect people on a daily basis. So despite the lack of funding that we've already discussed, the BHA board, in addition to hiring a great new executive director, has hired a new director of maintenance and more maintenance workers. And our response time is actually pretty incredible as compared to where it used to be and in comparison with other housing. So for emergency work orders, it's under 1 day. For urgent work orders, just over a day, and an average of just under 4 days for routine orders. That said, some of the systemic problems that we've identified that are underfunded, either deferred maintenance or infrastructure improvements, we need different kinds of funding. And that's the kind of packaging of resources that we need to do deep rehabs. And I am committed to seeing that happen at our state-assisted public housing. And I want to see everyone feel safe from hazards in their home. And I think that I have the ability with the board to do that.
Thank you, Sue. Over to you, Kimberly.
Hi. So I've been living this life for the last 12 years, right? And I first of all, Michael Alpern, I think our executive director has been doing a great job, right? Trying to make some changes. But as far as the units and it's just so, I feel like there's a lot of discrepancies in that. I've been living here since 2011, 12, I don't know, but none of that work has been done. Nothing has been updated. I still deal with mice. When I moved in, I had to purchase, I had to buy a cat, so I don't have to have mice. And as far as work orders go, I don't, I'm still waiting on the exterminator to come to my apartment, and I called them over 2 weeks ago. So I don't know if that's absolutely true. I have a leak, not a leak, but my kitchen sink right now is, my kitchen sink, my bathroom sink, if I'm brushing my teeth and I'm running my water, it's gonna overflow. I called maintenance over a week ago. That still hasn't been done. And these are the things that people are experiencing every day for years. We've had several new maintenance directors. And I don't know, I think for me, my priority getting elected is one thing, is that the commissioners should do a walkthrough annually of the apartments. I think they should see how we live every day. And so maybe that will make them prioritize the budget when they're thinking about where things should go, right? And so instead of making outside look beautiful, they just do some of the basic things on the inside, like extermination and fixing the problems.
Thanks to you both. We're going to move on now to our fifth and final question, and our order is going to be Kimberly and then Sue. And our question for you is this: not only are residents experiencing the health and safety issues mentioned in the previous question, but we also reportedly heard that residents are afraid to speak up around these issues and more due to the perceived threat of eviction and backlash. How will you address resident fears around speaking up? Moreover, how have you or will you ensure resident voices and perspectives are included and centered in the work of the BHA board? Kimberly?
So as a resident, I know what that fear feels like. I've been in fear. If you've never been homeless, you won't understand that. And so one of the things that I think that residents are afraid to speak up. And I remember calling the health department one time in 12 years. I called the health department because I was having an issue in my apartment. And when I did that, I felt like I was retaliated against, right? I got this bill for my stove being fixed. That wasn't fair. So then I just shut up. I didn't say anything else. I didn't make any more noise. And residents shouldn't feel like they can't make noise, because they deserve to have a place that they call home. Home should be safe. It should be clean. It should be updated. This should be just safe. And safety is basic things like making sure that there's no water leaks and making sure there's no rodents and things like that. And also addressing that fear. Residents shouldn't get letters that make them feel threatening. Every time there's a letter that comes out about anything, for the rodents, for parking, for anything, it's always that you could be evicted, or it's always so harsh. Why do there has to be a harsh tone with people who live in public housing? I don't know if it's other places. I know it's here. And so I know that going to the mailbox to find a letter is very triggering for me. I don't know about other residents, but I think that the board should address the way they sent out communication letters for people who live in public housing. The rodent problem is a problem throughout Brookline. That's not a housing problem. So don't make people feel threatened because we have rodents running all over the place. Say, how can we fix the problem together as a community?
Okay, Sue?
Well, it upsets me deeply to hear Kimberly's experience because it shouldn't be that way. And the information that I have is that we are responding to these complaints and we encourage people to pass on those complaints. We want to know when the conditions are not good. We want to be in a position to respond to them. I think our director has been in communication with residents. I think we're very open to hearing from residents at every board meeting. We hear those complaints, we follow up on the complaints. The resident is why we do this. We don't want the residents to feel in any way scared or anxious. If there's language in any notices that's inappropriate, we need to look at that. We need to address it. There may be issues where someone is out of compliance with the provisions of their lease, and that's a different issue. But where people are exercising their right to report a problem that they're having in their unit or to report an issue to the Board of Health, that should be a protected right, and we should respect that. And I believe that every commissioner who sits on the Brookline Housing Authority right now would agree with me, as would our director and our staff. So if there's some way that we're not communicating that commitment, then we need to look at that and we need to change that.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you both. And that ends the question and answer period, but we'd like to give you both an opportunity to make a statement. As a reminder, final statements should be 90 seconds or shorter, and the order of final statements will be Sue, then Kimberly. Over to you, Sue.
Well, I again want to thank everyone for highlighting these really important issues that as a commissioner, I want to hear about the issues and the problems. I want to be able to address them. I think my background has served me well. I can bring that to bear on the rehabilitation and improvement of the housing that we have here, which is a tremendous asset. Both the residents bring that to the town of Brookline and that we can bring to the residents. So I want to just highlight that I've had a number of initiatives in my career. Just recently during the Trump administration, I was the convener of a national working group of housing authorities opposing oppressive immigration policies of the Trump administration. I've done work in fair housing testing programs, which I initiated back at the beginning of my career in Springfield, Mass. I prepare language access plans, violence against women plans, reasonable accommodation plans, and I implement those to provide fair opportunity for all of our residents, regardless of their background or experience. I want to be able to continue to do that. I think I can do that well, and I think we could bring a better opportunity for everyone living in Brookline public housing, and we can improve that housing with another opportunity to serve.
Thank you, Sue. Over to you, Kimberly.
Thank you all for this forum. I can't say enough about how the reason why I'm running, right? If you look at my resume, you see a lot of volunteer experience, like a lot of volunteer work, right? In Brookline, why do I volunteer? I volunteer because I want more residents to have a voice at the table. So I sit at these different tables because there are not enough voices like mine at the table. And so I'm asking for a seat at this table because representation matters, lived experience matters. And it's important, again, the voice of those that are the most underserved deserve a voice at the table, right? To make change. And so we're working toward change, right? But there's more work to do. Why also am I running for housing authority? Because when we think about home, and I keep saying this over and over again, when we think about home, I think about home as a safe place, a happy place, a place where there's no stress. And when I come home and I get off work, I want to come into a place that makes me feel good because I had a lot of stress out in the streets. So when I walk into my apartment, I don't want to be like, oh, more stress. There's a rodent. Oh my God, more stress. I got a letter in the mail. I want an opportunity to have a voice at the table where residents like me have that voice to understand how these like policy decisions are made. And I want an opportunity to just make some change. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to you both. Kimberly and Sue, our BHA board candidates, thanks for your responses, and for all the candidates who joined us for your participation in our forum, and to all of you for joining us as well, those watching. Please remember that our town election is Tuesday, May 2nd, with polls open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. In-person early voting begins Saturday, April 22nd, and will run through Friday, April 28th. The last day to register to vote in the town election is Saturday, April 22nd at 5 p.m. The last day to request a vote by mail ballot is Tuesday, April 25th at 5 p.m. All registered voters may request a vote by mail ballot. To find your polling location and for more election information, please visit brooklinema.gov/138/election-information. Our candidates' positions on racial justice matter now more than ever. Having heard their vision and ideals, we hope everyone will hold our candidates accountable. Thanks again for coming. Good night.